To my beautiful wife, my husband announced to a room of Seattle's elite on my 39th birthday, who has finally mastered her greatest art form, being Mrs. Sterling. The laughter was like glass shattering. My name is Amelia Thompson, and at that moment, I wasn't a person but his most prized possession. The smile I wore was a mask, hiding the scar of the artist he'd forced me to bury. He thought I was his creation, perfectly controlled. He had no idea he'd just handed me the one thing I needed to break free. The rain was relentless that night, a Seattle downpour that smeared the city lights into a watercolor blur. It was my 39th birthday, and I stood at the edge of Canlis, the restaurant's floor-to-ceiling windows framing the glittering skyline across Lake Washington. Inside, the clink of champagne glasses and the murmur of polished conversation filled the air. My husband, Mark Sterling, tech titan and Seattle darling, had orchestrated this evening with his usual precision. To the world, we were the perfect couple: Medina mansion, power couple status, a daughter at university. But perfection is a heavy thing to wear, and I'd been carrying it for years. I adjusted the silk shawl Mark had chosen for me, its weight like a leash. He'd picked my dress too, a sleek black number that made me feel like a display piece rather than a woman. The table was a constellation of Seattle's elite, his board members, their spouses, and Jessica, my best friend of 12 years, her smile as bright as the chandelier above us. Our daughter Chloe was away at college, her absence a quiet ache in my chest. I caught my reflection in the window. Amelia Thompson, Mrs. Sterling, a woman who'd learned to smile through anything. Mark stood, glass raised, his charisma filling the room like oxygen. "To my beautiful wife," he began, his voice smooth as the Pinot Noir in his hand, "who, after a few bohemian false starts, has finally mastered her greatest art form, being Mrs. Sterling." Laughter rippled around the table, sharp and bright. I forced a smile, my cheeks burning. The jab was surgical, slicing open the scar of my abandoned art career. I saw it then, a flicker of a smirk between Mark and Isabella Croft, the Ice Queen board member with eyes like a hawk. It wasn't just a joke, it was a reminder. I was his creation, and he'd make sure I never forgot it. The room spun. I excused myself, my heels clicking too loudly on the polished floor. I didn't head for the bathroom. I slipped out the side door into the rain and drove. Not home, but to Fremont, to a dusty art studio I'd kept secret for years. The key trembled in my hand as I unlocked the door. Inside, the air smelled of turpentine and dried oil paint, a time capsule of the woman I used to be. Canvases leaned against the walls, half-finished dreams from a life before Mark. I sank to the floor, clutching an old paintbrush, its bristles stiff with neglect. The humiliation at Canlis wasn't new. Mark's cruelty was always veiled, always deniable, but tonight it had cracked something deep inside me. I remembered a promise I'd made to myself at 20, when I still believed in my own voice. I'd never let anyone erase me. That promise felt like a ghost now, but it stirred something alive. I wasn't going back to that house tonight. Maybe not ever. 2 days later, I was still in the studio, curled on a cot under a threadbare blanket. My phone buzzed with Mark's texts, apologies laced with concern, each one a hook designed to reel me back. "I'm worried about you, Amelia. That toast was just a joke. You're not yourself." I didn't reply. I couldn't. The weight of my life pressed against my ribs, and with it came a secret I'd buried so deep it felt like a myth. At 15, I'd given up a son, Ethan, for adoption. Mark didn't know. No one did. That secret was the root of my silence, the reason I let Mark reshape me. If he knew, he'd weaponize it. A knock at the studio door startled me. I froze, half expecting Mark's voice. Instead, a young man stood there, early 20s, sandy hair damp from the rain. His eyes were kind but guarded. "Are you Amelia Thompson?" he asked, his voice soft but steady. I nodded, my throat tight. He held out a small wooden box, its lavender scent faint but unmistakable, tied with a faded ribbon. "This is for you." His name was Caleb Vance. He wasn't my son, he said, but the son of Michael, my high school boyfriend, Ethan's father. Michael had died over a decade ago in a hiking accident, or so I'd been told. Caleb handed me a letter from inside the box, written in Michael's familiar scrawl. My hands shook as I read it. "Elaine," it began, using the pet name he'd given me at 16. "If you're reading this, I didn't make it. What happened to our son, it was never right. I tried to make things whole. The key is for you. Don't let them silence you." A tarnished safe deposit box key slid from the envelope, cold against my palm. I looked at Caleb, his face a mirror of my shock. He said he'd found the box hidden in his father's things, that he'd been told Michael's death left no loose ends. But he'd dug deeper, and now he suspected Mark, my Mark, was tied not just to Michael's life but to his death. The room tilted. My secret wasn't just mine anymore. It was a thread in a much darker tapestry, one that might unravel everything. I clutched the box, its lavender scent sharp in my lungs, and knew I'd never be able to go back to pretending. The next morning I called Jessica. Her voice was warm, like always, and I spilled everything. Michael, the letter, Caleb, the key. She didn't hesitate. You need help, Amelia. I know a PI and I've got a lawyer's number if you need it. Her certainty was a lifeline and I clung to it. Caleb and I met at a coffee shop in Capitol Hill, the kind of place where no one from Mark's world would ever go. We agreed to track down the safe deposit box, but the key felt like a bomb in my pocket. Caleb's eyes, so like Michael's, kept searching mine, and I wondered what he saw. A mother who'd failed, or a woman trying to fight back. Then Mark found me. I'd gone back to the studio to grab a sketchbook, and there he was, leaning against the doorframe, raincoat dripping. His voice was calm, too calm. Amelia, I'm worried. You're not well. This obsession with the past, this stranger showing up with some box, it's not real. His words were velvet, but they cut. He suggested I was grieving, imagining things, that Caleb was preying on my fragility. When he saw the lavender box on the table, his eyes sharpened. Let me keep that safe for you, he said, reaching for it. I wanted to scream, to shove him away, but his threat came soft and fast. Chloe doesn't need to hear about your episodes, does she? I froze. Chloe, my daughter, my light, she was the one thing Mark could use to break me completely. I handed him the box, hating myself as I did. The next day when I asked for it back, he looked at me with that practiced frown. I must have misplaced it, sweetheart. I'm so sorry. His lie was a blade and I felt it twist. The key, my only proof, was gone. I sat in the studio, rain hammering the roof, and felt the walls of my life closing in. Jessica's voice echoed in my head. Hire the PI, keep going. But the loss of the key felt like a death. I didn't know then that the real betrayal was still to come, or that the boy sitting across from me in that coffee shop was about to change everything. The rain hadn't stopped, a gray curtain over Seattle that matched the fog in my head. I sat in the studio, staring at the spot where the lavender box had been, Mark's lie echoing like a pulse. Caleb called, his voice steady but urgent. I took a photo of the key before I gave it to you, he said. High res, you can see the safe deposit box number. It was a lifeline, thin but real. I clutched my phone, the screen glowing with the image of that tarnished key, and felt a spark of defiance. Mark thought he'd won, but I wasn't done. Jessica had recommended a private investigator, Frank Miller, a grizzled ex-cop with a voice like gravel and eyes that missed nothing. We met him in a diner off Aurora Avenue, the kind of place where the coffee was bitter and the booths were sticky. Frank studied the photo, his brow furrowing. This bank's downtown. Accessing it'll take a court order, maybe weeks. He leaned back, sizing us up. But your husband misplacing that box? That's no accident. He agreed to dig into Michael's death, a cold case from 12 years ago. Hiking accident, he muttered, flipping through a thin file he'd pulled from an old contact at the precinct. Too clean, missing witness statements, smells like a cover-up. Caleb and I exchanged a glance. Michael's letter had hinted at danger, but a cover-up? My stomach churned. To anchor myself, I suggested a DNA test. If Caleb was Michael's son, it would tie him to my past, to Ethan. I needed something solid, something Mark couldn't twist. Caleb agreed, his jaw tight, and we sent off the samples. Frank called 2 days later, his voice low. Michael worked for a software firm in '98. Small outfit, got swallowed in a hostile takeover by your husband's company. Michael was fired, no clear reason. Sterling's name is all over the paperwork. My heart thudded. Mark and Michael connected? It wasn't just personal anymore, it was a thread to something bigger, something dark. Then the email came. I opened it alone in the studio, rain drumming the windows. The DNA results stared back at me, numbers that rewrote my world. Caleb wasn't Michael's son. He was mine. Ethan. My son. The boy I'd given up at 15 was sitting across from me in coffee shops, handing me keys to secrets I'd buried. My knees buckled. I saw his face in my mind, those kind eyes, that sandy hair, and realized I'd known deep down from the moment he knocked on my door. The lavender box wasn't from a lover, it was from a mother who'd never stopped grieving. I was undone, and yet, for the first time in years, I felt alive. Caleb, Ethan, sat across from me in the studio, his face pale as I told him the truth. "You're my son," I whispered, my voice breaking. His eyes widened, then softened, and for a moment we just stared, two strangers bound by a past neither of us had chosen. I wanted to reach for him, to hold the boy I'd lost, but guilt stopped me. I'd given him up, let him grow up without me. But when he said, "I'm glad I found you," his voice cracked and I broke. We cried together, a messy, raw release, and in that moment I felt a piece of myself come back to life. I needed to tell Jessica. She'd been my rock, the one who'd listened through all of Mark's cruelties. I called her, arranged to meet at a cafe in Belltown, but as I approached, my heart stopped. Through the rain-streaked window I saw her, sitting with Mark and Isabella Croft. They weren't just talking, they were conspiring. Jessica's laugh was too easy, her posture too familiar. Mark slid a thick envelope across the table and she tucked it into her purse. My best friend, my confidant, had been his spy all along. Every secret I'd shared, every tear had gone straight to him. Even Frank Miller wasn't her recommendation, he was theirs, hired to watch me, to see how much I knew. I ducked into an alley, my breath ragged, rain soaking my coat. My world was collapsing and I was alone in it. Then I heard Isabella's voice, sharp through the cracked window. "She's getting too close. We have to secure the offshore accounts before she finds the rest of Michael's evidence." Offshore accounts? Michael's evidence? This wasn't just about my marriage or my secrets. It was a crime, a conspiracy, and I was a loose end they needed to tie up. I stumbled back to the studio, my hands shaking, but a fire was growing inside me. They thought they could break me, but they'd just made their first mistake. Mark moved fast. By the next morning he'd filed for an emergency conservatorship, claiming I was mentally unstable, a danger to myself and our family's reputation. He had it all laid out. My failed art career, my delusions about Michael, my secret child. He even produced a psychological assessment from a therapist I'd never met, calling me paranoid, erratic. The papers painted me as a woman unraveling and Mark as the patient husband trying to save me. He'd locked me in our Medina mansion, my phone monitored, my car keys gone. I was a prisoner in my own life, the black sheep he'd always wanted me to be. The court hearing was a blur of cold marble and colder stares. Mark's lawyer smirked as he listed my episodes. The judge, an older man with tired eyes, seemed ready to sign me away. I felt the walls closing in, my voice shrinking to nothing. But then I thought of Ethan, of Chloe, of the girl I'd been at 15, promising herself she'd never be silenced. I stood, my legs trembling, and spoke. Not of conspiracies or keys, but of the quiet cruelty of my marriage, the slow erasure of my soul, the pain of a mother who'd lost her child. My voice was steady, raw, and real. The courtroom went silent. The judge's pen paused. He gave me 1 week to build a defense. That night, Chloe came to me. She'd been at the hearing, her face pale but fierce. "I'm done with him," she said, her voice shaking with anger. "You're my mom, and I'm with you." Ethan was there too, his presence a quiet strength. We sat in the studio, the three of us, a family I'd never dared imagine. They believed in me, and that belief was a shield. We didn't need to prove Mark was a bad husband. We needed to prove he was a criminal. Ethan remembered something from Michael's letter. A line about where our story began. The sycamore tree in Discovery Park, where Michael and I had carved our initials at 16. The lavender box was a decoy. The real evidence was hidden there, waiting for us to find it. Dawn broke over Seattle, the sky a bruised purple as we drove to Discovery Park. The rain had eased to a drizzle, but the air was heavy, pressing against my skin. Chloe drove, her knuckles white on the wheel, while Ethan sat beside me, his jaw set. Frank Miller followed in his beat-up sedan, his presence a gritty reassurance. We were a ragtag team, me, a woman who'd spent years hiding, Chloe, my fierce daughter, barely 19, Ethan, the son I'd just found, and Frank, a PI who'd switched sides when he learned he'd been played. The sycamore tree was our last hope, the place where Michael and I had whispered dreams as teenagers, carving our initials into its bark. If he'd hidden something, it would be there. We parked near the bluffs, the Pacific Northwest wind sharp with salt and pine. Discovery Park stretched wild and green, its trails muddy from days of rain. We found the sycamore, its gnarled branches unchanged after 24 years. I ran my fingers over our initials, A.T. plus M.H., etched deep, a relic of a life before Mark. Ethan knelt at the base, his hands searching the dirt. "Here," he said, pulling a loose rock free. Beneath it was a small, waterproof container, its edges rusted but intact. Inside was a USB drive, black and unassuming, but heavy with promise. We didn't have time to celebrate. Headlights cut through the dawn, a black SUV, moving fast. "Mark's security," Frank growled, shoving us toward Chloe's car. My heart pounded as we piled in, Chloe flooring the gas. The SUV chased us through the park's winding roads, its engine roaring like a beast. Chloe, barely out of high school, drove like she'd been born for it, weaving through trees and onto the city streets. We hit Pike Place Market, its alleys a maze of cobblestones and shuttered stalls. She took a sharp turn, tires screeching, and lost them in the chaos. I gripped Ethan's hand, my pulse a drumbeat. We were alive, but we weren't safe. At Frank's safe apartment, a cramped walk-up in Pioneer Square, we plugged in the USB drive. The screen flashed. Password required. The hint was a question. The day I truly became a father? I closed my eyes, the memory flooding back. June 12, 1998, the day I told Michael I was pregnant with Ethan. My fingers trembled as I typed the date. The drive unlocked, revealing files that could end everything. Financial records, emails, a recorded conversation. Mark's voice, cold and precise, planning to handle Michael. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just fraud or insider trading, it was murder. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with anticipation. Mark sat at the defense table, his suit impeccable, his face a mask of concern. Isabella Croft was beside him, her eyes darting to the exits. I stood at the plaintiff's table, Chloe and Ethan behind me, their presence a quiet strength. The conservatorship hearing was supposed to be Mark's final blow, locking me away as a madwoman. But we'd been faster. Frank had sent the USB's contents to an investigative reporter at the Seattle Times and the SEC, timing the leak to hit just as the hearing began. Mark's lawyer was mid-sentence, painting me as delusional, when phones started buzzing. Reporters in the back gasped, their screens glowing with breaking news. Tech CEO Mark Sterling, implicated in fraud murder. The courtroom erupted. SEC agents and Seattle police stormed in, cuffs gleaming. Mark's face went white, his charm crumbling as they read his rights. Isabella tried to bolt, but they caught her at the door. Jessica, named in the files as a conspirator, had already fled the city, but Frank's contacts said she'd been picked up in Portland hours later. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Interviews, depositions, headlines. Mark and Isabella faced charges that would keep them behind bars for decades. The truth about Michael's murder came out, his hiking accident, reclassified as a homicide. We held a memorial for him, not in a sterile church, but at the sycamore tree. Ethan spoke, his voice steady, honoring the man who'd raised him, who'd died trying to right a wrong. Chloe held my hand, her grip fierce, and I felt the weight of my secrets lift, replaced by something new, a family, real and unbroken. 6 months later, I stood in my Fremont studio, now alive with color. Canvases lined the walls, my paintings bold and unapologetic, each stroke a piece of the woman I'd buried. My first solo show was days away, and the space hummed with possibility. Chloe was home from college, arguing with Ethan over where to hang a piece, their laughter filling the room. I watched them, my daughter, my son, and felt a smile, real and weightless, spread across my face. I wasn't Mrs. Sterling anymore. I was Amelia Thompson, artist, survivor, mother. The past would always be there, its scars, a map of where I'd been. But it no longer owned me. I picked up a brush, dipped it in crimson, and began to paint. My life, my story had just begun. My story is a testament to the fact that it is never too late to reclaim the canvas of your own life. For years, I allowed someone else to paint over my true colors, to frame me in a life that wasn't mine. If you feel unseen, silenced, or trapped in a narrative someone else wrote for you, let this be your sign. Pick up your own brush, whether literally or metaphorically. Your voice matters. Your story is your masterpiece. Don't you ever let anyone else hold the brush.